Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to allow maybe another 30 seconds for everyone to get online from the waiting room, and we'll start shortly. Okay, I think we're good to go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Deirdre Moore, and I'm the Employment Manager here at AHEAD. You're all very welcome. We probably have some regular WAMinars joining us, and we have maybe some new people to our webinars as well this morning. So welcome, everyone. I'm joined by my colleague Alice Hartigan on the screen here. Alice will be moderating our panel shortly, so you're in for a real treat. We've got three great panelists that are going to share their experience and their involvement in various ERGs or employee resource groups across various organisations. So Alice will introduce them shortly. And I'm also joined by Jane Fort, our newest WAM team member, and Jane's doing tech support in the background, and Philip Carroll is also in the background as well, one of our senior project officers. So like I said, welcome. We're going to go through a couple of housekeeping bits before we kick off the actual session. So I just want to let people know that there's live captioning available by clicking the CC button, which is a feature on the bottom of your screen, of the Zoom screen. If you have any questions, we're asking people to use the Q&A box just so that we can capture those questions as we go through and answer them at the end. We will stop the recording for the Q&A session just to allow people that kind of, I suppose, sensitivity around maybe what they want to ask, and to have a bit of a free chat at that time. You can chat with other attendees through the chat box feature, and Jane will also be dropping some links and resources into the chat box as we go along. And we will share the slides and those links after the webinar. So we'll email everything out to everyone that's registered, not just attending as well. We're encouraging people to use our hashtag WAMinar. So it's a capital WAM and then lowercase INAR. So just if you're mentioning on socials or anywhere that you have joined the webinar this morning, we'd love you to use our hashtag. Okay, sorry. So before we get going, we have nearly 200 people registered to attend the event today. So we just want to get a sense of who's in the room and who's tuning in. So I'm going to ask Jane to launch a very short poll. And while you're answering that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our program here in WAM. So I'll just read out the two poll questions first. So the first one is, please select the option most appropriate to you. So you're a hiring manager, you're a line manager, you're a regular employee, you're a designated disability or access officer, you work in HR, or you don't meet any of the above. And the second question is one on which sector do you work in? So are you in further education, higher education? Do you work for an NGO or not-for-profit? Or are you with a private employer or public sector or semi-state employer? Or again, you don't meet any of the above, which are all fine. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the work we do here in the WAM program while you're answering the poll. So the Willing Able Mentoring Program has been around since 2005, and we just celebrated 20 years last year. We're funded by the Department of Social Protection, and the WAM program has two main objectives. One is to widen access to employment for graduates or people with disabilities looking for employment, while also supporting employers to create more inclusive workplaces. So over that 20 years, we've secured over 800 placements for disabled graduates or employees within both the public and private sector. So you can learn a lot more about the program and hear about our employment opportunities and also our employment related workshops, resources, and events that the Get Ahead program or Get Ahead initiative run by signing up to our WAM Works database, which is going to be linked in the chat in a few minutes and again in the resources that we send out. We will be advertising from September onwards our next round of recruitment opportunities. We're currently in the middle of lots of needs assessments where we work with the graduates who've secured an employment opportunity or a WAM placement, and the employer to identify what workplace supports they need and recommend those reasonable accommodations for their placement. And we're doing a lot of training at the minute. So we're in that phase of our work at the moment, but we will be advertising opportunities from September onwards, including the civil service WAM placements, which are 10-month placements with the opportunity for permanency at the end of that placement. We'll also have some roles with Board BIA, Bank of Ireland, ESB, Pfizer, and a whole other lot of employers. So sign up to the database, or if you're not looking for work, but you're working alongside or supporting people or know somebody that's looking for work, you can also sign up to the AHEAD newsletter, which is linked on the main landing page of the AHEAD website. One last thing I want to tell you a little bit about in terms of AHEAD news. We are currently establishing a disabled advisory group, which will inform the employment-focused work of AHEAD. So the group is going to be called the Lived Experience Alliance for Disability in Employment. And we're seeking a diverse group of members with a wide range of experience, whether seeking, in employment, more established professionals, maybe a manager. So we're looking for people with various backgrounds and perspectives to inform the work of AHEAD. And the purpose of the group is to ensure that lived experience, as with all of our work in AHEAD, is informed and advised by disabled graduates and professionals to inform our employment-focused work, including Get Ahead, WAM and WIDE. The group will also support our advocacy and awareness raising work in relation to disability and employment. The group will provide advice and feedback on programs, resources, events, and initiatives from the perspective of disabled graduates and job seekers. And the group will also have an opportunity to contribute to events and activities that promote inclusive employment and amplify the voices of disabled graduates and job seekers. So if you are somebody that would be interested in being part of that group, or again, you know somebody that might be really interested and add good value to this group, we're really encouraging people to reach out when we open applications next week and express interest in being part of the group. We're really excited. It's a great opportunity for people to help us shape and form this group over the next 12 months and onwards. So in terms of timelines, the applications will be opening next week and they'll be open for about 4 to 5 weeks. So there'll be a short application form that people will fill out just to get a sense of who the person is, who the person applying is, because like I said, we want to have a kind of diverse range of people and representation on the group. Over the months of August and September, AHEAD will then review those applications and we will select a number of people to go forward to the group, and we will have a video call before that final selection just to tell the person a bit more about the group, learn a bit more about you and what you might contribute to the group. And all going well, we are expecting to have our first meeting in person on the 12th of November in Dublin, and there will be a professional development and training opportunity as part of that first day. And after that, the meetings will be held online about 3 times a year. We're expecting to allow people to tune in from across Ireland, and also to ensure we're providing accessible features to coming along to those meetings. So next week, keep an eye on our webpage, our socials, our newsletter, or if you're on the WAMWorks database, you'll get a notification about the group. And you can also email our Get Ahead officer, Bamba Fitzgerald, who's going to be leading out and facilitating on this work. So Jane, I might ask you to launch the results of the poll, if that's okay. Sorry, that was a very long introduction to our work. There's a lot happening here at the minute. So we can see here that we have mostly people working in HR, and then we have kind of regular employees, managers, designated disability officers. So a nice mix. Excuse me. And then again, a nice mix across education, not-for-profit, private, and big cohort from the public sector. So welcome everybody. Thanks a million for filling out that poll. Okay, so I'm just going to start the actual topic of exploring employee resource groups. So just to give a little bit of context, in ahead, the WAM team held an in-person event in March, which was called Culture in Bloom, a season of transformation. So we really explored the topic of culture in the workplace from a disability point of view and a disability lens. But throughout the day, we heard from attendees that they were really interested to learn more about employee resource groups or staff networks, as they're also known as within organizations. And we had a number of people presenting and sitting on the panel on the day that were involved in employee resource groups. And actually, one of them from BNM is here today, Kieran. And we just, I suppose, felt that there was an appetite and an interest in having a further discussion and further information learning in this area. So the team have been working for the last couple of months on organising the event for today. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context to what ERGs or staff networks are, because we're conscious some people will be very active and involved in ERGs. They might be a member, they might be a sponsor of an ERG, and others may not really know what they are. They mightn't be in your organizations yet. So we're kind of just want to set the scene a little bit. So to do that, I want to share with you a resource that's available through AHEAD and Employers for Change. It's called the WIDE framework. So it's Widening Inclusion in Disability and Employment. Widening of inclusion of disability in employment. And you can see there's a link to the platform or the framework. And AHEAD, in partnership with Employers for Change over a 2-year period, developed this framework, which is all around the hiring, progression and retention of people with disabilities in the workplace. It's a platform that's available to anybody to log in and use. You can just visit the web page or platform, or you can actually create an individual account or an organizational profile where you and your colleagues can actually look at the various aspects of workplace and inclusion and work on further enhancing and developing that within your workplace. So I'm just going to use the framework as a bit of a structure for organizations if they want to go in and look at the area of supporting disabled employee resource groups in a more structured way, because the aim of the platform is for people to be able to go in and look at different aspects of the workplace and assess how you're going, and also get ideas and understanding around how to further your efforts in a particular area. So the WIDE framework is divided into 6 domains, and one of those domains is called Organization Policy and Strategy. And within each domain, there are areas of effort. So under the Organization Policy and Strategy effort, there is one called Diversity and Inclusion efforts. Those efforts are then divided or broken down into actions with guidance, resources, links, and relevant legislation specific to that action that you're going to be working on or that you're reviewing and looking to further develop. So using domain 1, area of effort, diversity and inclusion, there is an action around supporting disabled employee resource groups. So that is to support the development of employee-led disabled networks and consult them in designing diversity and inclusion efforts. So the action will have KPIs or key performance indicators for you to understand what exactly is involved and how can we as an organisation support disabled ERGs, their establishment, their ongoing work and sustaining them in the workplace. So it's a really nice way to kind of maybe start your journey of supporting an ERG, or maybe kind of looking at how are we getting on and is there anything else we can be doing in this space. So what are ERGs? An employee resource group is a voluntary employee-led group that focuses on building community, visibility and inclusion around a shared identity, experience or interest. So you can see that these are usually open to members and allies. So it can be somebody that has that identity or maybe has an interest or experience within the particular purpose of the group. So you could be a member or an ally, but it's important to say that these groups are meant to be for people across the whole organization, no matter what role or position you're in within the organization. The focus of our ERGs are usually on support, inclusion, and advocacy of that particular group need, and as is identified by that group. The group's typically supported by the employer, but they are led by the employees, so they're meant to be employee-led. Some common focus areas include disability, gender, LGBTQ+, carers, cultural diversity, parents and families, or well-being. And there are probably many more, but these are just kind of the more common or typically known ERGs that we hear about. So why do ERGs matter for disability inclusion? For disabled employees, ERGs are especially important. They help people to feel seen, heard, and valued. They create trusted spaces where staff can share lived experience and support each other. They can amplify the employee voice, and they can build awareness across the organization. So ERGs don't just benefit individuals, they add value to the wider organization, to the wider understanding and awareness of the particular group that the ERG, and in this case, disability, to raise awareness around disability across the wider organization. I suppose they also help shape more effective inclusion initiatives and ensure decisions reflect real experience. So that's the employee-led part and actually having a voice within the wider organization. So as part of the wide framework that I mentioned earlier, there was consultation process with various stakeholder groups, and disability organisations were one. And this is a quote from one of the disability organisations in relation to the ERGs. So I think having visible disability networks in companies makes a big difference, especially in terms of supporting people with disabilities to feel they belong and that the organisation is serious about inclusion. So just to move on quickly to what makes ERGs effective and valuable. So for ERGs to be effective and valuable, and to work well, they need to be more than good intentions. They must be properly supported with time, recognition, and leadership backing. Importantly, the direction of the group should be led by those with lived experience. They should be sponsored, like I said, by senior leadership and have a clear link to decision making to ensure collaboration and to inform better policies and inclusion strategies within the organization. They're also, I suppose, effective or very valuable for improving accessibility. So within the workplace for employees, the built environment, the digital environment, and so forth, but also they're really important for improving accessibility of services or products that the company or the organization are creating, developing, selling, and so on. So they've got a twofold, I suppose, benefit for internally and externally with customers. So just to say, I suppose they don't just benefit individuals, they add real value to organizations. They help shape more effective inclusion initiatives and ensure decisions reflect real experience. And ERGs should act as a partner and not just a discussion group, that they should be really actively embedded in the organization. So just before we move on to the panel discussion, I just want to share a couple of little resources that we have linked here. One is the WIDE framework that I mentioned. There's a really good video on the landing page of WIDE to explain how the platform works, and also a user guide as well. And like I said, it can be a really nice way to kind of look at where you're at along the journey of either establishing or having an ERG group that's active. Employers for Change also have a web page that's designated to employee resource groups for inclusion in the workplace. and I came across a really nice video that's about the HSE Lakela Staff Disability Network. So that's linked there. It's a couple of minutes long, but it gives you a really nice insight into a disability ERG that's actively doing work within the HSE. And just to finish up, one of the employers that was involved in the consultation of the wide framework um, gave this quote to us: "Our disability employee resource group is resourced and leadership approved. It has buy-in. It helps to give awareness, focus, and momentum to the work around disability." So I'm going to ask Alice and the panel members to maybe switch on your cameras, and I'll let Alice take over from here. So welcome, Alice, and all the panel members.
Great. Thank you so much, Deirdre, for that introduction and presentation as well. It really helps set the scene for our discussion today, I think. And so just before we move into the panel discussion, I just want to remind the audience to get their questions into the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom panel of your Zoom screen. It'll be the easiest way to manage the Q&A section at the end of this conversation. So, joining us today for the panel discussion is three people. So, first off, we have Kieran Butler, who works as a Health, Safety and Welfare Officer with B&M and is a former mentor on the WAM program as well. He serves as chairperson of B&M's Beyond Limits Employee Resource Group, which is a network dedicated to championing accessibility, inclusion and equitable opportunities for employees and external stakeholders with disabilities. We're also joined by Jamie Cosgrove. So Jamie is a higher executive officer in the Department of Enterprise, Tourism and Employment, where he works in the organisation culture team. Jamie is the co-chair of both the Proud to Work for Ireland Network, also known as the PWIN, and the Pride and Enterprise Network. Jamie is a founding member and the first co-chair of the PWIN, which is an LGBT plus staff and allies network in the civil and public sector. And then we're also joined by David Jones, who's a highly accomplished global debt product manager within Issuer Services in Citi. Prior to his current role, David served as the Issuer Services product head for Citibank Europe. He's also a co-sponsor of Citi Ireland's Disability and Neurodiversity Network and the Families Matter Network. So we're getting a great spread of perspectives, I suppose, in the panel discussion today. So thank you all so much for joining us and giving your time. Really appreciate it. So just to kick us off, I might start with yourself, Kieran. So in 2022, you returned to work with a new disability. So could you talk to us a little bit about that experience and maybe how that influenced your involvement with employee resource groups?
Yeah, no problem, Alice. Well, firstly, thanks very much for having us this morning, and good morning to everybody that's out there. So just, I suppose, my own personal lived experience, I had a CVST, so basically a blood clot on the brain in 2022, which caused damage to my optical nerve. So I ended up having brain surgery and I had to get a VP shunt installed. So I suppose that was a fairly challenging time in my life. I was 12 months off work at the time. I lost my car license. I lost my ability to do any physical activity or training while doctors were trying to figure out what was going on with me. And I suppose that really affected me mentally. So there was, I suppose, points where I was really concerned about losing my vision completely. And I suppose the doctors didn't know what was going on at the time. So I kind of struggled a lot with not that kind of anxiety of what to do and where to go for advice and what should I be doing and would I ever be able to go back to my day job as a health and safety officer. So like ultimately I ended up visually impaired, so the right eye was damaged beyond repair. So I suppose when you look at me, I don't want to look like I have a disability, but it's something that challenges me every day when I go to work. And like it's very hard to explain to people sometimes how I have my license back and I'm able to drive now, but I'm still classified as visually impaired with a blue badge. And I don't think a lot of people understand, or they maybe don't know that not all impairments are visible, or that they can affect people in so many different ways without you actually realizing it. So I suppose that led me to getting involved. When I did come back to work, I went through a reasonable accommodation process with my employer B&M, and that led me to doing some occupational health assessments, which was great because I suppose I came back on a phased work plan, 2 days a week for a couple of months and then back to 5 days over a period of time. So look, there was lots of challenges in coming back to work. I had to get technology and equipment that I needed for my new world, as I call it. And all of those facilities weren't there because we never had somebody with a visual impairment in the organization before. So nobody really knew what I needed most of the time I didn't know what I needed, but I paired up with Vision Ireland and I started to get some technology assistance with them and a bit of counselling and stuff like that. And that gave me a platform to see, well, what tools are out there that I could use going back to work. And I suppose that then when I came back was one of the reasons why I got involved in the ED&I committee first and foremost. It was, I suppose, to look at what barriers are there. So probably rather selfishly, a lot of us don't look at what we need or what other people need. We kind of generally focus on what we need. And I suppose I never really thought about accessibility or inclusion before because it wasn't a problem for me, and I wasn't dealing with people that had an issue in our organization with these type of things. So I suppose that's kind of why I got involved. That I said I might as well become part of the change rather than just highlighting a whole lot of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really speak to, first of all, like that idea of the majority of disabilities in Ireland are acquired throughout people's lifetime, but also the majority are also invisible. So you're really kind of a real example of that happening to somebody in their life, but also the importance of like lived experience being listened to really in the workplace and how that impacts kind of policy and changes and everything. And I suppose that might lead us on to David for yourself, as a network sponsor, maybe someone in a senior leadership role, but also as a parent of a child with a disability. I suppose, how has your experience shaped the way you support those employee resource groups?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Yeah, I suppose I'm in Citibank now nearly 19 years. And as you referenced there at the start, I'm the co-sponsor of the City Disability and Neurodiversity Network and also the Families Matters Network. I think it's important to note that I was also a member of the Disability Network, as it was called at the time, probably about 16, 17 years ago when it was first formed within City. So I always had an interest in that area to ensure that we have, inclusion and equality as well. As you referenced, I have my eldest daughter, who's probably 10 years and a bit now, has a very rare syndrome called APERT syndrome, which really, affects her mobility in relation to it's a craniofacial syndrome and also other aspects in relation to her hands and her feet, etc. So I think, by seeing the challenges that she has gone through, has made me really want to ensure that I can champion for her within the workforce, and also, outside of the workforce as I do on a day-to-day basis as any parent does for their child, regardless if they have a disability or not. So I suppose effectively, as you referenced there, as I moved up within the organization, I felt there was an opportunity for me to re-engage within the disability network and really contribute, I suppose. So effectively, a position came up to be a co-sponsor of that network, and obviously, I put my hand up straight away to be able to get involved in that. And really, I suppose the role of a co-sponsor is to help the network navigate throughout the organization. As you can imagine, some of our organizations are quite broad. I think probably circa 250,000 people globally. Within the Ireland site, we're 3,000 plus within the Irish site alone. So effectively, I suppose I see my role as being one of providing guidance, advice, intervening at the appropriate time. I think the team there do an excellent job without my day-to-day oversight. We kind of form the group as having, two co-sponsors, two co-chairs, and then various roles within the committee. Really, I suppose, to ensure that they can kind of stand in their own 2 feet and progress. But we could probably delve into that a bit later in some of the other questions. So I suppose from my perspective, it's, wanting to be involved, having genuine interest, bit of practical, I suppose, experience on my side. And really, I suppose, contributing what I know from both not only an organizational perspective, but also from a personal lived experience perspective. And that carries across both into the Disability and Neurodiversity Network, but also the Families Matters, because the Families Matters Network covers as well around, you know, uh, parental or maternal requirements and in general fun as well for children in relation to parties in the organization and barbecues and stuff like that, So you can carry it across to all of those groups and really, I suppose, try to make a positive impact within the organization and for my colleagues and their families.
Yeah, great. And I think, mentioning obviously your daughter who has a disability, but the importance of kind of allyship there and getting involved, even if you don't personally have the lived experience. And I know we're going to speak a little bit about that later on, perhaps with Jamie. But for the moment, Jamie, I might just move to you, kind of speaking to that point of like, a lot of people get involved with ERGs because they're passionate about the topic usually. But the PWIN began from kind of a group of volunteers just trying to organize their participation in Dublin Pride, essentially, in the parade. So at what point did you realize this could actually become something bigger than that?
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, I suppose the first real indication that it was going to become something bigger than just people organising around Pride was after our first participation in Dublin Pride post-COVID. So there was a commitment in the National LGBT Inclusion Strategy in 2019 for the formation of a staff network from across civil and public service. So we kind of felt that there was something there, but as with a lot of things during COVID, it was shelved, and there was, the remote working really didn't allow us to grow. So we first started organising a couple of months before our participation in the 2022 Dublin Pride Parade, and we've quickly found out that okay, there's an appetite for something more than let's just organise at the parade and then we'll meet again next year. So we grew very kind of quickly after our first participation. We coordinated the involvement of over 700 civil and public service plus friends, families in marching in the parade, and at our peak we had I think it was 1,200. So we're the single biggest cohort in the Pride Parade. So we quickly identified that it was growing a lot bigger than just a few people meeting once in a while. So we got in touch with our colleagues in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, or DEPR, and we started to really put plans in place to put a kind of formal touch onto the network and onto the growing of the network, if we would call it that. But it was pretty much after we first started to organise that we realised, hang on, there's actually something here in this, and it's grown and grown since, which I'm sure we can talk about whenever you want.
Yeah, so I suppose I know when we spoke before this panel that you told us about how you're supporting kind of 30 organizations across the sector, really, which is obviously a massive undertaking. So I suppose what's the most important kind of building blocks for that, and the challenges and the engagement with senior leadership and kind of that cross-sector kind of profile that you have?
Absolutely. Like, there's a lot of benefits to it, but there is a lot of challenges, for anybody who's worked in the public sector. It's something as simple as dealing with another department or a different department is very challenging. But I think the first kind of key building blocks is identifying your stakeholders, both internal and external, both from within the civil service and public service to the likes of NGOs and charities that you can work with. So we quickly discovered that our two key internal stakeholders were the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, and then the Department of Children, Disability and Equality, as they have the equality brief. So we started off by really getting in touch with our key contacts in those departments to discover, okay, well, how can we build this? What do you need from us? And then we began the process, which was long and difficult, of putting in a terms of reference together, which it may sound as simple as here's a template in terms of reference, but given that we meet on a monthly basis, both in a hybrid format, so in person and via Teams, we wanted to make sure that there was real structure put on the network. We also wanted to create committee positions, which again, something that I think we can talk about maybe a little bit later, about the importance of specified roles, even if it is in a less formal network, the importance of committee roles or organising roles. They don't necessarily have to be a committee, but organising roles, that people who can take the lead on things. So we began that process and got through the process of putting the terms of reference in place, identifying committee roles, and then we had our first AGM where the election took place. And again, we wanted to make sure that everybody had their chance to go for a role if they wanted, and we had an election, very formal. We had our elections, and then once we had a committee in place, then we felt that we were ready to contact the likes of the Department of Public Expenditure and DCD to sort of to say, okay, well, we're in place now. Let's start growing together and building together. In terms of, we really felt it was really important to engage with senior leadership. I know, a network for me is for everybody, regardless of, their grade or their standing in the organization or the department. But senior leadership buy-in is really, really key. Oftentimes, especially in say civil and public service, where it's very hierarchical. You've your secretary general working down to clerical officers and service officers. So we got in touch with senior leadership across the two key stakeholders. We came to them with a business case about our asks, about the formal structure and supports, be it budget or infrastructure such as mailboxes. And to do that, we had a business case for them. I think one of the key things to be kind of ready and key challenges is to kind of be ready for the awkward questions, be ready for the difficult questions, the why, the who, the what, the when. So having your homework done, and that is, we found that was really, really key. But yeah, so that's how we've grown. As I said, we're ever growing as well. Like, we started off with a couple of people meeting in a room in Kildare Street in my building. And we've now grown to coordinating thousands of people participating in events throughout the year, not just for Pride. And we're going to continue growing as well.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the importance of essentially like engaging with various people there, like stakeholders, senior leadership, people on the ground who want to get involved.
Yeah.
There's a lot of coordinating in that, and that's a really important kind of lesson of keeping that structure, like you said, with committee roles, trying to help kind of formalize that a little bit. And I suppose, Kieran, for yourself, talking about engagement, how did you kind of engage with people across B&M's organization, and how did the network, the EDI network that you spoke about, or the committee that you initially joined, I believe that actually branched into different sections then. So you might talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a bit like Jamie, Alice, our organization committee started up kind of quite, I suppose, started off as conversations in canteens and moved to people coming together, realizing that there's more to this and that people want more. So I suppose organically it just grew then to being a bit more formalized, and we started to have monthly meetings, and I suppose within that then we started to see, okay, there's a whole lot of topics here that not everybody is comfortable about. If you want to talk about awkwardness, you should try getting 5 men into a room and talking about the menopause, because that's one of the ones that stands out to me. We were having a discussion in the ED&I committee, and I suppose that was like, okay, we're completely out of our depth here. So is there, I suppose, an appetite for a group? And there absolutely was. So that's one of the ERG breakouts that came out of it. We have a menopause support group. We have a domestic violence support group. We have the Beyond Limits one for disability. So that kind of just came up as of conversations and different things that were happening in the ED&I committee meetings, and not realizing that we're probably not doing some things in some of these areas, and we probably should be for the greater good of the company. And I suppose that's where those kind of things came out of. I suppose I would also say that really, like our HR team support, there's a HR support on each of the committees that we have. And then we have an SLT sponsorship, so there's a leadership person involved, but ultimately they're driven by the chairperson, vice chairperson, and the great groups of people that are in it. So each of our networks would have about 8 to 9 participants, as well as the SLT sponsor and the HR representative on them. So I suppose we formalised the meetings then. I suppose we joined up with the Irish Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, and we went for the Bronze Award there first. And I suppose that gave us a framework to work with. So a bit like the one that you've developed now in terms of WIDE, it was something that gave us a framework to, well, what should we have and what do we need to get to? Because a lot of us were shooting in the dark. We were just having conversations about things, but we had no formal structure around it. So that gave us areas to focus on, and it gave us targets, and it gave us, I suppose, results-driven items as well. So at the end of, we went through an accreditation process. We got our bronze. We're now at silver, and we're going for gold in 2028. So it's something that keeps evolving. It's always getting you to continuously improve what your groups are doing, and it's giving you those targets to aim for, and actually telling you, well, what should you be doing to be better for the greater good of everybody in your organisation. So
Yeah.
that's
And I think that really speaks to, again, it's kind of, there's a theme coming up of structure here a little bit in some of these conversations around like using the frameworks or those awards as a framework to have something to work towards. So when you have those monthly meetings, there's, an agenda set and you're kind of comparing it against targets, I suppose. Um, I know, Kieran, when we met previously to kind of discuss this event, you were talking about how when some of the networks were kind of branching off into different areas, you were, the EDI network or the EDI committee were talking to staff to get involved. What do they want from it? And I think you were telling me a little bit about how at one point you were even going out to depots, some of the depots to talk to some staff. I thought that was
yeah.
really interesting. You might just talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, so like I suppose naturally everybody in the committee has their normal job in the company. So part of our role, and my role in particular, was one that I visit a lot of sites. So when I was out and about, I would talk to the workers about not just health and safety. I'd be talking to them about, well, did you know about this employee resource group that's available? And other people that were in different departments on the committees were doing the exact same thing. And we did visit sites as teams as well. So we piggybacked on other events that were happening in the company as well. So if there was a public event where we were inviting all of our staff to our headquarters in Newbridge, for example, there would be people at the back talking about it. And I suppose we did a lot of surveys. So we do the eye count survey annually to see what numbers of people we have with disabilities. So when we started out, I think we were down at 3.2% of our employees were saying that they had a disability. And this year we done it last month and we're up at 5.5% now. So that's a huge increase over 3 year period. And I think a lot of that is down to, well, people are becoming more comfortable with talking about having a disability. And I think a lot of it is down to we're actually out there talking to people on the ground, whether that's as part of the committee or just in our general day jobs. But I definitely think it has raised awareness with line managers and supervisors on sites as well that they're open to having conversations, and I think we've created that culture where it's okay to have a talk about when things aren't going that good, that what we can do better and what we can potentially do for our employees to make their lives easier in the workplace.
Yeah, I think that's so important and like getting that kind of feedback from staff, but like so smart essentially when you're already out on site doing something for your day job, working smarter, not harder, and mentioning the staff networks that are there. Kind of because with those bigger organizations, and this might be relevant for you, Jamie, as well, and for City, that there's so many employees and they work in different areas, maybe different departments, and so it's so important to try and reach those the best way possible. But I suppose, David, I might come to you, as a co-sponsor, maybe a senior leadership kind of perspective. What do you think distinguishes staff networks that kind of succeed and flourish to those that sometimes lose momentum or maybe become inactive?
Yeah, thank you. I think Jamie and Kieran have covered some of the points during the discussion, which I think kind of naturally flows out, right? So, I think it's very important to have the appropriate structure in place. If you don't have the appropriate structure in place, then it becomes a bit unruly, and people lose interest. Or, as you referenced there, everyone has a day job to do on a day-to-day basis. So, effectively, if you feel that your contribution isn't adding value to the greater committee or the good, then you may just go back to your day-to-day job and give up on it. So I think having that appropriate structure in place, and what we've done is as a reference at the start there, we've put in two uh, co-sponsors. So effectively, generally senior people within the organization who can provide that guidance and outline the structure of how the network should be formed. And generally, the reason why we have two co-sponsors and two co-chairs is just to ensure from a coverage perspective and to the point of, BAU, parties could be traveling or caught up in projects or urgent deadlines that need to be addressed to. And therefore that gives the appropriate coverage for other parties to ensure that the momentum is maintained, that the meetings happen when they should happen, and that the events happen as they should as well. So really, we have, two co-sponsors, two co-chairs, and then underneath that, then we've got various, I suppose, designated roles around whether it's finance or communication or event management or engagement, and then obviously liaison as well internally. So I think, people understanding what their role is and the criteria of that role, what the framework is, gives them very clear guidance. And, effectively then they're not questioning themselves in relation to what they're contributing and what they need to do or what their parameters are. So I think that definitely adds value to the groups. And then as well, obviously we have, the appropriate budget, so each group gets a budget throughout the course of the year. we engage as a group and decide how that budget should be spent. So it's not a top-down approach. It's very much a collaborative view as to looking back on previous events as to did they work or not, what the attendance was like, what the feedback was like from the events, and having to adapt. Obviously, post-COVID, a lot of events, during COVID took place over Zoom, and since that point in time, we have a hybrid working structure. So, if you have to be in the office 3 days a week plus, but so, you're not going to get a situation where everyone's in the office at the same time. So, we've obviously introduced Zoom and, tried to make that as interactive as we can, or do in-person meetings, because when the teams put a lot of time and effort in relation to organize an event, then you want to ensure that, people participate, that there's the appropriate feedback on it, and that people get some value out of hosting those events as well. So, as part of that, we do a kind of lessons learned. We share experiences amongst the committees. I think there's probably about 10 different committees within City Dublin and alone. We meet on a quarterly basis to discuss what other committees are doing. We have, access to what they're doing from a kind of calendar perspective to ensure there's no clash of two big events in the same day on site. So we're not competing against each other from a committee perspective in relation to events or attendees or messaging. And then also, trying to understand what worked well in one group, what didn't work in another, and then navigating, the kind of communication route or any kind of vendor engagement route, and just sharing those experiences as well. And I think, in any large organization, there's staff attrition. So you want to have the appropriate structure in place that if, a co-chair or a co-sponsor leaves, that doesn't impact on the momentum of the group, and that's kept going. And that structure is in place, that people can step into it and understand, what needs to happen. And, as I said, I'm co-sponsoring two groups, and that's because the co-sponsors in those groups had moved on to do other roles, and I put my hand up, and very much a case of having conversations to get involved in them as well. And I'd also say two more points. One is, I think it was referenced by both Kieran and Jamie as well, is, senior engagement. That the head of Citibank, Ireland, Davinia, is very active and engaged in our committees, and very very big supporter and champion of them. And, they're certainly discussed quite frequently and more formally in our town halls, and we have our newsletters. So it comes from the top as well in relation to ensuring people are engaged and active, and showing the support that these committees and what is organised matters and is valued as an organisation. And then finally, all the staff members. So, I outlined that there's those kind of formal roles within the committee, but then we have other parties as well who are part of the committee, don't have any formal role, but, step in as and when required in relation to, assisting with events, or, doing administration, or, championing the event with their colleagues and in their team meetings throughout the organization, and then also making sure that they get the recognition for that, and they outline it in their appraisals, and they note it to their manager, and that they have the appropriate support from their manager to attend these events. Obviously we host the WAM event in our building every year, and that's quite a significant event. But people love getting engaged in that, and love spending time on that, and it's important that that's recognized as well within their kind of day-to-day framework, and that people understand that. So, I suppose in summary, it's for having the appropriate infrastructure in place, having the engagement from the seniors and the broader parties in the organization as well, and clear communication and sharing experiences and challenges within the other networks as well, because there's definitely an overlap between networks in relation to what works and what doesn't work, and being transparent and not being afraid to fail, and understanding that not everything works all the time. And that's fine. And then just kind of tweaking those aspects and moving forward from it, I think, and open dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because it's been mentioned pretty much by everyone, is that importance of kind of senior leadership buy-in, or buy-in generally from colleagues of different types. But I suppose, Kieran, I know you mentioned that, I think you said there's a HR rep on each of the networks. I'm just thinking in that conversation, like, how did that come about? Was it a natural thing and they were all very naturally invested, or was there a conversation about engaging that senior buy-in?
From when the original ED&I committee we had, it would have been just there was a member of it, so it kind of evolved because HR wanted to start the ED&I committee and improve what we were doing in that area. And I think then with the other committees, a lot of it came down to, well, we do need budget for all of this. So if you're trying to get things done in an organization, it obviously has to be financed, and you do need to have somebody in a senior leadership position that understands that there is going to be a cost to that. And like, fair play to all the organizations that do, because it does take senior buy-in, and everybody appreciates that there's a cost with that. So like, that was kind of, I suppose, where it came from. We need to get people on board from every department. It wasn't just HR. So we have IT representatives. So if we have accessibility issues around our website, for example, or barriers that are there around applying for a job in our organization, we need IT to be on board with making that change. There's no point in having a committee that just decides you have a lot of problems, but not having an avenue to get to the solution. So I suppose we would have been representative in that sense. We went out looking to all of the different parts of the business to get involved, because we identified very quickly when we started meeting that we could sit here talking about things every week and get nowhere, because we don't have the right people in the room to actually foster the change and make the change. And so I suppose that's where it really came from, Alice.
Yeah, and I think that idea of being like really proactive in like reaching out to colleagues that you think would be beneficial to sit on those committees is so important, of like not waiting for people to come to you almost, being really proactive in that. And I think it's been mentioned there in the conversation before about, getting feedback and not being afraid to fail and trying things is such an important aspect of these types of networks. So, Kieran, I'll just stick with you for a minute, but how did you get feedback from staff about the work that you're doing, and maybe what did that tell you about the attitudes towards disability in the workplace?
So the ICOUN survey was kind of the main avenue at the beginning. So we asked people about accessibility and inclusion and what could we do better as an organisation. So then, as a Beyond Limits ERG for people with disabilities, we reviewed that feedback. And then I suppose as our monthly meetings, that's where we actually come up with our annual plan for what we're going to target and do for the year. And then we sit down with the wider ED&I committee, and as David mentioned, there's a lot of overreaching factors in each committee. So what we try to do is not to, I suppose, overstep on some other event that somebody else is having. So we would hold a lot of events. So like, we would have had guest speakers in on International Day of Persons with Disability, which is the 3rd of December every year. So that's one of our cornerstone events for our group. So we put that into a calendar, so that this year now everybody going forward will see that each group has their couple of main events. I suppose, look, we get feedback from all of those events. So when we host an event, if we have a guest speaker, or whether it's an internal fireside conversation with internal colleagues talking about having a disability, or being a carer, or dealing with a parent with dementia or something like that, they've really resonated with people. The feedback we've got is that people are very more interested in hearing about their own colleagues and what they're dealing with in their lives, and I suppose the accessibility challenges and things like that, rather than hearing it from a stranger. No, there's a place for both, but it really seemed to land with people when we did the internal fireside chat. So we had 3 or 4 of our own colleagues, and our SLT Beyond Limits chairperson Sonia would have, I suppose, she would have been doing what you're doing today. She would have been a chair in that session and having honest conversations with people about their day-to-day outside of work, and how that impacts them in work. And I suppose that gave us all a real appreciation that behind every individual in our company, there's a person that has a different life outside of their job. And many of us have lots of challenges that we don't necessarily talk about every day in the workplace. But they are affecting what we do, and what we bring to work, and who we are when we go to work. So I think that feedback came back to us, and I suppose we targeted that over the last year or two to really be more involved with our own people, in using them in the process of getting, I suppose, feedback and designing where we're going and what we're doing. And I think one of the things we learned about disability in particular was that a lot of people are, I suppose, apprehensive about having conversations about disability, because they don't know how to talk to somebody with, like, if you see someone in a wheelchair, how do I approach that person? What do I talk to them about? If you talk to anybody in a wheelchair, they'll tell you, I'm just the same as you. I want to talk about what the weather is. I don't always want to talk about the fact I'm in a wheelchair. Or I suppose, do we help them or do we ask them? So what I would say to people is, have the conversation. Like, that's what's been coming up constantly. People are people, so talk to the person and ask them if they need help or need assistance, and they'll very quickly tell you yes or no, I do or I don't. And I think, but that's something that has come out. I suppose we've done a lot of training in accessibility and inclusion with our site managers, so that they can feel more comfortable. We came up with, I suppose, easy language guidelines for managers and supervisors as well, to, I suppose, try and so normalize the conversations and make it a little bit easier for them to navigate, because they mightn't have anybody or they might not know anybody with a disability, and they're not exposed to that life, or they don't know what the challenges are or the barriers. So that it has opened up all of those like conversations and made it, I suppose, a little bit easier to navigate for everybody.
Yeah, and there's kind of some interesting things in that of like one, it's the network or the ERG is providing a safe space for people with disabilities to share experiences and to have those conversations in a safe environment, but also for people who don't have that experience to learn from that. It's like a two-pronged approach, right? So they're learning about someone else's lived experience, and we often know through various campaigns, say for example during marriage equality, it was talked about how if people shared what it meant to them personally, that made a really big difference to family members and things for people who might not understand. So there's definitely something in, we all know the importance of testimonials. We would talk a lot in the WAM program about, getting testimonials of grads and really trying to deliver the message of the positive impact. And that seems to land better when it comes from people who really went through something. So I think that's like a really interesting point that you brought up. But Jamie, I might just go to you for a second, just to talk about, what practical actions have made the biggest kind of difference in ensuring your network is effective, but also reaches staff in different departments because it's such a wide-reaching kind of network.
Yeah, it's something that I think both Kieran and in particular David really covers. It's the common denominator is the structure piece on it. So given that it is, we're often doing this in our spare time or in between the cracks in our work time. Having the committee structure and having the active member structure really helps. So, for example, our committee has two co-chairs, two co-secretaries, two co-events and comms officers, a treasurer, one treasurer, and then six ordinary committee members, all of whom are extremely active in covering other people's work when it's needed. Which is something that I think is often kind of goes under the radar a bit, when people are willing to jump in and help on stuff that may not be in their designated role. In terms of reaching the department, or other departments or organizations, that piece around, good, clear communication, who do you go to? What do we do? Who do I contact if I want to go along to an event? Which also kind of feeds into that is the building of an address book. I think it really can't be understated how important it is to build that. It's the old school, the contact for who do I need to go to in that department or that organization, be it in the civil and public service or external. In terms of really getting a reach out there, PWIN has built an extremely good relationship with our wonderful colleagues in public jobs, which is the civil and public service recruitment, basically recruiters. We had a Pride launch event at the start of June, which was hosted in public jobs, and we had secretary generals from across civil and public service coming in, senior leaders, HR leaders coming in. And being able to do that allows us to reach into organizations that we just may not be able to get into because it might be a smaller organization, it might be, a smaller staff group. So we like that event, public jobs were very kind to advertise that on LinkedIn and I think on Twitter, and again, that's growing the reach of it in ways that we couldn't do. I think also simple things as posters for events. If we're having an event, so for example, we meet on the third Thursday of every month for a social catch up in Street 66 on Parliament Street. And one of our members created a poster that we put that around in our offices and around buildings. Again, it's just that signposting that we're there. I know our colleagues in Deeper are working on a networks page. I think it was there at one stage, but I think it's going to be revamped. So again, getting the name on that, getting or PWIN's name and contact details on that is really, really key. So I think the biggest practical actions is just that really good, clear communications piece. It really can't be understated how important that is. Clear messaging on who you are, what do you do, how do you join. Even those three things I think are the kind of key things to hit in terms of reaching into other departments or organizations where you're not already present.
Yeah, I think the visibility essentially
Yeah,
is like so important for any organization, but particularly for you guys who are spanning 30 different organizations. That's quite a
yeah.
challenge. So implementing all those different avenues in terms of physical posters, online notice boards, social events help spread the word, which might be helpful for some people listening today to thinking about how do you actually market something like an ERG or how do you get people involved?
And it's something I would always say, like, don't be afraid, or ashamed isn't the right word, but don't be afraid to ask someone who has a bigger contact list than you do. Is there any way we can, like, I spoke at the HR leaders meeting in public jobs, so it's HR leaders from across civil and public service. Again, just as a mean of getting our name out there. So I'd never be afraid of asking, you know, if it's a senior leader, hey, are you a member of a network? Can we, like, for example, the Assistant Secretaries Network in the civil and public service, we asked them, could they circulate our Pride launch event? So I think, don't be afraid to ask other people, hey, would you mind putting that up on the post on a notice board for us?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it kind of speaks to maybe a life lesson that maybe some of us are aware of like chance in your arm. People
Yeah.
might say no, but they might say yes. So you never, hurting doesn't ask, or asking doesn't hurt, and that can always be helpful if you just don't know who you'll reach through that. And I think often you'll find that most people want to help you. Most people want to be decent and maybe just share it onto their network. And kind of that's the handy way of reaching so many people again, because you're so cross-departmental. It's a great way of doing it. I suppose, David, I might just come to you for a second. Just, as someone who's a co-sponsor and has that more senior leadership kind of lens when you're at these network meetings, I suppose ERGs or staff networks can have these amazing ideas, and there's lots of ideas floating around about how to implement things. But how do sponsors really strike the balance between encouraging the enthusiasm and the ideas and the passion, and also managing expectations or maybe even budgets?
Yeah, I suppose it's around providing, constructive guidance and kind of direction and kind of reviewing which ideas are feasible and not, rather than just saying no. And I suppose part of that is, by, certainly my experience within the organizations, as referenced, I've been there 19 years, have a good understanding of how it works and how the construct is, And I think, I certainly want to encourage ideas coming from the members and the broader team as well. And you don't want to have a position where the co-sponsor role is not an authoritative role. It's very much a guidance role in relation to helping the network navigate the organization and providing relevant touch points, and that seniority, as Jamie had referenced as well, around leveraging contacts or reaching out to the appropriate parties to say, I know you've got a big team. Can you kind of advertise this to your team, and can you kind of help champion it? And I suppose it's just around trying to explain why some things may or may not work. I think for example, we had a suggestion around bringing your dog to work day, which I think, we'd all love, and I think my dog would love to be in the office where it's a bit quieter than with the kids here, maybe. So I think, from that perspective, it's a great idea, but I think the practicalities of it, there's a lot of challenges in relation to, controlling and multiple dogs in the same location, allergies, some people are afraid of dogs, so on and so forth. So I think it's around the case of just kind of playing that back maybe to parties and understanding that, whilst it's a good idea, there are some practical limitations on that, and then maybe suggesting a different route and encouraging people to come up with ideas. So I think it's very much, I see my role as being a sounding board and, as a sponsor, really helping the network and helping people navigate the organization and really achieve what we're looking to do, and not get distracted by some other aspects perhaps, right? Whilst, making sure, to your point, how you manage the enthusiasm. I think everyone who's on these committees is enthusiastic, and you just need to make sure that that doesn't get drained by, any bureaucracy or challenges that may find. So I think it's a case of, as a reference, being a sounding board, being a partner, helping champion their ideas, really being a support within the organization, and obviously being available as well as a sponsor effectively, right? You need to have that availability. You need to show up to the meetings. You need to, lead from the front, for want of a better word, and show that you're interested in it and keen to develop the organization as well. So I think, in summarization, I suppose I see my role as really being a partner and one who can provide maybe constructive challenge or constructive ideas, whilst ensuring that the network runs by itself effectively with just a bit of guidance from myself.
Yeah, and I suppose on that point around kind of being visible as a sponsor in meetings is really important, and the visibility of senior buy-in or the sponsorship element. And I suppose for people who are on the call today who might be thinking about sponsoring an ERG or a network in their organization, what would you kind of say to those people about thinking about it, but maybe they're on a bit of a fence?
I'd say do it. So come back to the point, what are you going to lose effectively, right? So I think, Jamie and Kieran have clearly articulated how networks work, what you need to do. You need to have that framework in place. You need to ask people, you need to get engaged. Certainly for myself, I find it very rewarding. It does take time, but that's fine. I think Jamie referenced, we find that time in the cracks of our day-to-day role. And if you have a good team around you and have that structure, then it doesn't take as much time as maybe you think it's going to take. And then once you've got 1 year under your belt, you've got a framework, you've done some events that have potentially worked, some events that haven't worked. You can, refine that. The ones that have worked, you can build on them, see how you want to tweak it, see if you can make it larger or more impactful to the group. The ones that didn't, then, you just replace them with other ones. So I'd say if you have a genuine interest, then absolutely get involved. I enjoy being part of two of those networks, in the formal capacity, and obviously members of other networks in an informal capacity. And I suppose from a personal perspective, my manager is based in London. I don't necessarily have a team in Dublin, so it really anchors me to the site as well, and anchors me into City in Dublin and the network there and my colleagues, which you could kind of drift a bit if you didn't have that kind of engagement and participation with your colleagues on a site perspective. So I find it very valuable from a personal perspective in relation to, that kind of connectivity, but also, as we referenced at the start of the call, my daughter has a very rare syndrome. So I suppose just trying to do my little part in the organization and the world, trying to champion for her and other parties as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you said, that being connected to your colleagues, especially if you don't really have a team, or possibly for some people listening, if you have a more hybrid role, if you're not in the office, that might be an important point of actually connecting with people who might have similar interests or passions to you is really important. I just have a couple more questions before we go to the Q&A. So just a reminder to the audience, if you do have a question, to pop it into the Q&A function down at the bottom of the Zoom screen. But Jamie, just on that point of like development, you might speak to us a little bit about for people who are thinking about maybe joining a network or starting a network even. Obviously, people join primarily for passion or for advocacy, something they're interested in. But there's obviously an element there that is professional development. So you might speak to us a little bit about kind of the benefits of that element of joining a network.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I recently gave a talk to the Department of Public Expenditures, their EO forum, and basically it was a kind of same topic as this, a kind of the value of ERGs. And the way I described it, I have that there's three strands of how ERGs can really help you in your professional development and your personal development as well. The first I looked at it is the networking element. I think as you're progressing in your career, be it, I don't mean just as a promotional way, but just as you're going through your career, the importance of networking is it's really, really important it's something that I used to roll my eyes at, when you hear about networking, it's like, oh God, but to be able to have your contact with someone in maybe a different side of the organization, if you need information about something that you're working on, or in another department, that you need to find out information for, or even just to have someone in that department. I think that's really important. The skills development, if you're an active member of a network, you can build your skills chest of, it could be around public speaking. A lot of people in their day-to-day roles, they may not have the opportunity to do public speaking, and it may be something that they're worried about doing or afraid of doing, but being able to, host an event and you have to get up at the start and say a couple of minutes or a few words, for a few minutes, that really helps. Organization, to be able to organize events, meetings, to chair meetings, again. So I think that, skills development piece is really, really important. And then the final strand that I'd look at is your reputation building. If you're looking for personal development and professional development, you know, being an active member of your organization, an active member of your department, again, is vital. I've often found, if you're sitting in front of a promotion, an interview board, you know, and if the interview board are from people within your department or your organization, if they can go, I know this person because they've done X, Y, and Z, and I've seen them speak, and if that is already putting you in a good standing in front of that interview board. So I think it demonstrates your commitment to your organization as well. That because ultimately the ERGs are for the better of the organization. They're for the better of the department. They're there to be an outlet for staff. For a safe space. For in and across any walk of life. So again, you're really demonstrating how you are, you're not just coming into work and you're sitting at your desk and you clock out and you're gone home and that's you. Some people like that and that's fine. But if you're in terms of your development, professional development, I think you do need to show that you're an active part of where you're working. So yeah, I think those three strands are really important for development.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so interesting because when we speak about networks or ERGs, again, we often speak about like you'd get involved because you're passionate or you've lived experience or you're an ally. But actually, we very rarely talk about there is a professional development aspect of that and skill building aspect, which is
Yeah.
really important for people in the workplace. So I think that's a really interesting thing to point out to people listening today who might want to get involved but don't know what role they might play. You might just be playing the role for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's important as well. Kieran, I might just come to you as maybe one of the last questions before we go to the Q&A is, being active in a staff network, did that change or impact your sense of belonging in the workplace as someone who did return with a disability? And I suppose maybe alongside that, what would you say to someone considering joining an ERG as well?
Yeah, so I would say absolutely it did. Being involved in the Beyond Limits group gave me a stronger sense of belonging to B&M as a whole. It allowed me to bring more of myself to work. So after returning with the disability, I was still trying to figure out what that meant for me personally and professionally. I wasn't still fully sure whether I was going to be able to go out on sites and do health and safety inspections, for example. But through the being involved in the committee and getting talking to people and getting out and about again, it gave me back my own confidence that okay, I'm not going to trip over a mat going in and out of place. I'm not going to fall over a sign when I go into sites. And I suppose talking to people, I would find now like my manager and my colleagues look out for me a lot when I'm in the workplace that they're highlighting hazards to me that potentially like they know I have no vision in my right eye, so they might help me and signpost me around and navigate different things. So like that's been a huge thing for me, and I suppose I talk about it a lot, and for that reason, because I want other people to feel comfortable. So I suppose getting involved in it really did help me realize that I wasn't on my own, that there was other people across the organization that mightn't have had the same lived experience, but they might have family or friends or whatever with disabilities as well, and they just want to make the place more accessible overall. So it did give me a voice and shape in the change as well. So like we're building a new HQ at the moment. Our ERG is involved in looking at the universal design of that building to make it better for all people with all sorts of, whether it's neurodiversity or disabilities, that people that are in wheelchairs. We're not just looking at standard stuff. We're looking at sensory rooms. We're looking at the equipment. We're looking at the desks that are all suitable for every user, and we're looking at the equipment. So like it's been really helpful that the allies in our construction team and in our management team are the ones driving that, not us. We were asked to come onto that workshop. We didn't look to go onto it. So that's a really positive thing for me, and I think it speaks to the strength of what the organization is doing as a whole in terms of getting people involved, that it's become part of the norm. It's not something that is just a bolt on that we think about after the fact.
Mm.
I would say to anybody who is thinking of joining an ERG, do it. Don't wait. Don't feel like you have to be an expert, or don't feel like you have to have the perfect words, because none of us do. We're all learning as we go. And I think if you do things with the right intention and the right, I suppose, beliefs, and even if you say something wrong, you should be open, and people should be open to have that conversation to say, well, that's not how you properly talk about that. And look, we've had that. I've been in meetings that we've had where somebody said, oh, well, you can't really say that. And we've fleshed it out as to why. And then everybody learns. So everybody in the group then knew, well, no, that's not a term we should use anymore, or maybe that doesn't feel right or sit right. So that there are things that have come up, and I think if we all work on them together, then we can only make the place better for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so interesting what you're pointing out about, building the new HQ and being asked to get involved in that in terms of maybe accessibility audits and things. That's such an important kind of piece around, moving from a group that's active, but actually influencing policy, influencing procedure and real things that impact people in the workplace. So I think that's a really big point. If there's people listening who are senior leadership or are going through changes in the workplace like that, to think about, are there people that you could bounce these ideas off? Is there someone with lived experience who would be willing to think about the accessibility or how that impacts lived experience, whatever the topic is? So what I might do is ask our tech support just to pause the recording. We usually pause it for the Q&A section, just to give people space to kind of answer. Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for joining us today and to our panelists. I just want to thank the speakers, and I also want to thank my colleagues Deirdre and for everyone in the background doing tech support. I really appreciate it. As always, our feedback on webinars are really important to us from the audience. So we do have a short survey that'll probably be posted in the chat. And when you close down this, there should be an automatic pop-up for you to answer that survey as well. Just to give us an idea of how you enjoyed this, maybe some suggestions for the future. So we'd really appreciate it if you could fill that in. You can keep an ie on our website, which is ahead.ie, pretty straightforward, for any upcoming events. And you can also email WAM, so WAM, at ahead.ie if you'd like to be added to our list for these types of events, to be kept in touch with us as well. So I'll leave everyone to go back for their lunch. We're bang on time of 1 o'clock. But again, thank you so much to our panelists for joining today. Your insights were really interesting, really impressive, and I hopefully gave people some really practical understandings of how to start ERGs or maybe how to develop them into the future as well. So thank you guys so much for joining us again today, and thank you to the audience for attending, and have a lovely week.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was
God
lovely
bless.
speaking to you. Thank you.